The severance paperwork sat between us, crisp and insulting, while the 27-year-old executive smirked over his cold brew. He thought he was cutting dead weight, but he didn't realize he had just severed the digital artery keeping the company alive. I gave them 15 minutes. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in the conference room was heavier than the humidity outside. It was a thick, suffocating quiet, broken only by the rhythmic clack of Bryce Caldwell's pen tapping against the polished mahogany table. He wasn't even looking at me. He was staring out the window at the skyline, feigning a deep, executive burden that he hadn't earned and certainly didn't feel. "So," Bryce said, finally turning his gaze toward me. His eyes were empty, glazed over with the supreme confidence of someone who has never had to pay a mortgage or worry about the price of insulin. "We feel that we're at a crossroads, Victor. A divergence of paths, if you will." I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded in my lap, resting on the fabric of slacks I'd bought 5 years ago. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that I prayed didn't show in my neck. Divergence of paths. It was corporate speak for get out. "I'm not sure I follow, Bryce," I said. My voice was steady. It was the same voice I used when the servers caught fire in 2018, the same voice I used when the payment gateway crashed on Black Friday 3 years ago. It was the voice of the person who fixes things. Bryce sighed, a theatrical exhale that fluttered the edges of the paperwork. Angela, the HR representative, had slid across the table. Angela couldn't look at me. She was studying a microscopic scratch on the table's surface, her face flushed with the shame of being an accessory to this. "It's about velocity," Bryce said, leaning forward. He was wearing a Patagonia fleece vest over a t-shirt that probably cost more than my first car. "Uldridge Corporation is pivoting to an agile, cloud-native posture. We need synergy, we need rapid iteration. And frankly, Victor, your methodology it's traditional, it's heavy, it's legacy." He said the word legacy like it was a slur, like it meant diseased. "My methodology," I said slowly, "kept the vendor management system from collapsing during the merger last year. My legacy code is currently processing 40,000 transactions an hour without a single error." Bryce waved a hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "That's exactly the point. You're focused on maintenance. We're focused on disruption. We need fresh eyes. We need people who aren't afraid to break things to make them better." He signaled Angela. She finally looked up, her eyes apologetic, and pushed the folder the rest of the way toward me. "We've prepared a generous transition package," she said, her voice thin. 3 months of severance, outplacement services, and Sobra coverage, of course. My stomach dropped. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Do they have any idea how much Sobra costs? My mind didn't go to my career. It didn't go to my pride. It went straight to Katie. My daughter was 21, a junior at State, carrying a full course load and a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes that didn't care about corporate restructuring. Her insulin pump supplies, her continuous glucose monitor, the specialist visits. It was all tied to the Eldridge Group policy, the policy that was currently being revoked by a boy who treated the IT infrastructure like a sandbox. 3 months. I repeated. "I've been here 14 years, Angela. It's the standard cap for this restructuring tier." Bryce cut in, checking his Apple Watch. He was bored. He was actually bored while he destroyed my livelihood. "Look, Victor, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sign the papers, hand over your badge, and let's call it a day. We need the office cleared by 5 for the new junior devs coming in on Monday." He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. He grabbed his iced coffee, the condensation leaving a ring on the table right next to the termination letter. "We appreciate your service," he said, turning his back to me to look at his phone. "But the future waits for no one." I looked at his back. I looked at the severance agreement. And then, a strange calm washed over me. It was the cold clarity of a surgeon realizing the patient is already dead, and there's nothing left to do but call the time of death. I stood up. I didn't reach for the pen. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my security badge and slid it across the table. It spun slowly, stopping perfectly between his overpriced coffee and the legal documents. "You've got about 15 minutes, I said. Bryce paused. He half turned, a confused frown wrinkling his forehead. "Excuse me." 15 minutes, I said, smoothing down my shirt. "Until the wheels come off. Maybe less." "Is that a threat?" Bryce scoffed, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "Because I can have security escort you out right now." "I'm not making threats, Bryce. I'm stating facts." I looked him dead in the eye. "Good luck finding my documentation." I walked out of that conference room, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me. The betrayal didn't feel like a stab in the back. It felt like a diagnosis, cold, clinical, and terminal. The walk from the conference room to the elevator felt like walking underwater. The fluorescent lights of the corridor hummed with a frequency I had memorized over 14 years. I passed the server room door. My server room. I knew the hum of those racks better than I knew the sound of my own car engine. I knew which fan in rack 4 had a slight wobble. I knew which fiber cable in the ceiling plenum was slightly pinched and needed to be jiggled every 6 months. I passed cubicles filled with people I had helped. There was Sarah from accounting. I had recovered her hard drive when it crashed last Christmas, saving family photos she hadn't backed up. She waved at me smiling. She didn't know yet. There was Mike from logistics. I had written the script that automated his shipping manifest so he could leave at 500 p.m. instead of 700 p.m. to see his kids. He was on the phone laughing. I didn't wave back, I couldn't. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, sealing me off from the 14th floor, the physical weight of the situation hit me. My knees buckled slightly, and I had to lean against the metal railing. Unemployed. At 52. With a diabetic daughter in college and a pension that was 3 years away from vesting fully. My chest tightened. The panic was trying to claw its way up my throat, a hot, acrid taste of fear. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. I walked out of the building and into the blinding afternoon sun. The city noise, traffic, sirens, construction assaulted my senses. I felt exposed. Without that badge on my hip, I was just another middle-aged man on the sidewalk, invisible and irrelevant. I didn't go to my car. I couldn't sit in traffic right now. Instead, I turned left and walked 2 blocks down to Murphy's Tap. It was a dive bar in the best sense of the word. Dark, smelling of old wood and floor wax, a place where the music was never too loud and the drinks were never measured. I pushed open the door, and the darkness was a relief after the glare outside. Tommy Murphy was behind the bar wiping down a glass. He was ex-Navy, a man whose silence was heavier and more comforting than most people's conversation. He took one look at my face, my pale skin, the slight tremor in my hand as I placed my phone on the bar, and he didn't ask what I wanted. He just reached for the maker's mark. He poured a double, neat, and slid it across the scarred wood. They finally did it, Tommy asked. His voice was gravel worn down by years of shouting over jet engines on aircraft carriers. Yep, I said. I picked up the glass. My hand was steady now, effective immediately. Bastards, Tommy muttered. How long you give them? I glanced at my watch. It was 4:43 p.m., 12 minutes. I said. Tommy raised an eyebrow, leaning his elbows on the bar. That precise. It's a house of cards, Tommy. I was the only one holding the glue. I took a sip of the bourbon. The burn was grounding. It reminded me I was still here. I looked down at my phone. It was black and silent on the bar top, a sleek, modern coffin for my career. But I knew what was happening inside the silicon chips of the servers 4 blocks away. You see, Bryce and his team of innovators had forgotten one crucial thing. They assumed that systems ran on magic and the cloud. They didn't understand that the cloud is just someone else's computer, and computers are stupid. They only do exactly what they are told. And at 40:55 p.m., the daily authentication token for the master vendor API was scheduled to refresh. For the last 3 years, that refresh had been handled by a script I wrote. A script named Watchdog Auth. Pi. It lived in a secure directory on my local admin drive, which mapped to the server every time I logged in. But I wasn't logged in anymore. My account had been disabled the moment I walked out of that room. You look like you're waiting for a bomb to go off, Tommy observed, pouring himself a coffee. Not a bomb, I corrected him. A suffocation. Imagine the oxygen slowly being sucked out of a room. First you don't notice, then you get a little lightheaded, and then suddenly, you can't breathe at all, and you have the oxygen tank. I built the tank, I said, and I just took the key with me. To understand why this hurts so much, you have to understand what Eldridge Corporation used to be. When I started in 2011, it was a logistics firm run by serious people who understood that shipping millions of dollars of freight required precision. I didn't just write code. I built the digital nervous system of the company. I had spent nights sleeping on a cot in the server room during the Great East Coast blackout. I had missed my 10th wedding anniversary dinner because a ransomware attack from a Russian IP address tried to encrypt our finance database, and I had to manually patch the firewall packet by packet to stop it. I saved the company $4 million that night. My reward was a firm handshake from the old CEO and a generic Employee of the Month plaque, and I was fine with that. I wasn't in it for the glory. I was in it because I took pride in the fact that when a truck driver in Ohio swiped his fuel card, it worked. When a warehouse in Munich needed a manifest, it printed. I was the invisible hand that kept the world moving. Then came Bryce Caldwell, 27 years old. MBA from a prestigious school where I assumed the curriculum consisted entirely of buzzwords and confidence drills. He arrived 3 months ago, swept in after marrying the current CEO's daughter. The story around the office was that they met at a mindfulness retreat in Sedona. His first act as Chief Innovation Officer was to install a standing desk treadmill in his office and declare that chairs were sedentary anchors of the past. His second act was to call a department-wide meeting and tell us that our infrastructure, the infrastructure I had blood to build, was embarrassingly archaic. He didn't look at the uptime reports. He didn't ask why we had 99.99% reliability. He just saw that the user interface wasn't pretty enough and that we weren't using the latest trendy software stacks he'd read about on TechCrunch. Victor, he had said to me in our first one, on 1 week before the firing. He was bouncing on his heels, his AirPods gleaming white in his ears. Why are we paying for these custom scripts? There are SaaS platforms that do this. The SaaS platforms don't handle our specific legacy data formats, Bryce. I had explained patiently. I wrote those scripts to bridge the gap between the old mainframe data and the new web portal. If you remove them, the portal can't read the inventory. So we migrate the data, he said, as if it were that simple. As if 14 years of data was just a Spotify playlist you could drag and drop. That's a 2-year project, I told him. And until then, the scripts are the only thing keeping the lights on. He had rolled his eyes. Actually rolled them. You engineers always complicate things to justify your existence. It's called job security engineering. I see right through it. That was the moment I knew. He didn't see me as an asset. He saw me as an obstacle. A glorious, expensive, old-fashioned obstacle standing between him and his digital transformation. Bonus, he started cutting me out of meetings. He stopped copying me on architectural decisions. He hired a consultancy firm, a group of 20-year-olds in skinny jeans, to audit my work. They produced a 40-page report filled with graphs that meant nothing, essentially concluding that the IT department was bloated. And through it all, I kept working. I kept the scripts running. I kept the patches updated. Because that's what you do. You do the job. But looking at my phone on the bar top of Murphy's, I realized that doing the job had been my fatal flaw. I had made it look too easy. I had smoothed out the bumps so effectively that Bryce thought the road was naturally flat. He was about to hit a pothole the size of the Grand Canyon. My phone buzzed. I stared at it. The screen lit up. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from the company's automated alert system, a system I had designed to text the admin when critical failures occurred. Alert C call file ORI. UFR 503. I looked at my watch, 4:56 p.m. right on time. The phone buzzed again. Alert to BLI getaway ASA and again. Email row UD Sarvi degradidi. I took another sip of bourbon. The vibration of the phone against the wood of the bar felt like justice. It's starting, I said to Tommy. What is? The education of Bryce Caldwell. The phone didn't just ring, it convulsed. It danced across the varnished wood of the bar top, buzzing with a desperate, frantic energy that mirrored the chaos I knew was unfolding 4 blocks away. I watched it for a long moment, the screen lighting up the dimly lit corner of Murphy's tap. Incoming calls. Angela Seacharv incoming call Bryce Caldwell message from Darren's Ops Vic. Are you seeing this? Dashboards are all red. Message from Bryce, hey man, need to ask you something quick. Pick up. You gonna get that? Tommy asked, eyeing the device like it was a live grenade. No, I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. I'm not on the payroll, Tommy. I'm just a guy having a drink. I picked up the phone not to answer it, but to flip it face down. The vibration continued, a persistent bzz that rattled against the wood, but I ignored it. Instead, I pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from my jacket pocket. It was an old habit, something I'd started back in my first year as a junior sysadmin. Always keep a log. I opened it to the current date and uncapped my pen. 4:56 p.m. Watchdog authentication failure initiated. 5:05 p.m. estimated cascade to billing module. 5:30 p.m. warehouse dispatch systems will lose sync. I was writing the obituary of my own career, but also the death certificate of Bryce's reputation. I finished my drink, paid Tommy with a $20 bill, and told him to keep the change. If anyone comes looking for me, I haven't seen you since Tuesday. Tommy finished wiping down the counter. Go home, Victor. Get some sleep. You look like you need it. I walked out into the cooling evening air. The traffic was gridlocked, standard for 500 p.m. But for the first time in 14 years, I wasn't rushing to beat it. I wasn't checking my email at the red lights. I drove my F-150 slow and steady, listening to classic rock, while my phone continued to vibrate in the passenger seat like a trapped insect. When I got home, the house was quiet. It was a modest place, a 3-bedroom ranch I'd bought with my late wife 20 years ago. It was paid off mostly, but the property taxes were a killer. I walked into my study, a room filled with server spare parts and bookshelves lined with technical manuals, and went straight to the fireproof safe in the closet. I dialed the combination. Click, click, clack. The heavy door swung open. I bypassed the passports and the birth certificates and pulled out a thick manila envelope labeled Employment Contracts and IP Riders 2011. I sat at my desk, clicked on the heavy brass lamp, and spread the documents out. I needed to be sure. I knew I was right, but paranoia is an occupational hazard in my line of work. I flipped to page 14, paragraph 7. Subsection B, Intellectual Property Rights regarding personal tooling. Any automated scripts, utilities, or software tools created by the employee primarily for the purpose of personal workflow optimization, developed outside of core business hours and without the use of proprietary company source code, shall remain the intellectual property of the employee. The company is granted a non-exclusive, revocable license to use said tools solely during the term of the employee's active employment. I traced the words with my finger. Revocable. During the term of active employment. I had written that clause myself. I had insisted on it because, early in my career, I'd seen a company claim ownership of a calculator app a guy wrote on his lunch break. When I signed on with Eldridge, the old legal counsel, a decent man named Henderson who retired 5 years ago, had laughed and said, planning to invent the next Facebook, Victor. Just protecting my toolkit. I had said, keep good records, Victor, he'd told me. I looked at the stack of hard drives on my shelf. I had logs of every hour I spent coding those scripts. Timestamps showing 200 a.m. on Saturdays, 1100 p.m. on Sundays. I had git commit logs proving they were written on my personal laptop using open source libraries. I wasn't just an ex-employee. I was a landlord who had just evicted a tenant for non-payment. My phone chimed with a different tone. A priority override text. It was from Katie. Dad card got declined at the pharmacy. Insurance issue. Picking up insulin. Call me. The calm evaporated. The cold, hard rage returned sharper this time. They had cut the benefits. Already it hadn't even been 3 hours, and someone in HR, probably on Bryce's orders to streamline the offboarding, had terminated the policy immediately instead of waiting until the end of the month. I picked up the phone. I didn't call Bryce. I called the pharmacy. Put it on my personal card, Shelley. I told the pharmacist who knew us by name. I'll sort out the insurance later. Just make sure she gets what she needs. You got it, Mr. Reynolds. Is everything okay? Everything is going to be fine, I lied. Just a glitch in the system. And after I hung up, I looked at the text messages piling up from Eldridge. There were 42 of them now. The panic was palpable through the screen. Bryce, Victor, pick up the phone. Bryce, we have a situation. Bryce, this isn't funny, man. The whole backend is dark. Bryce, seriously pick up or I'm calling legal. I smiled a cold, mirthless smile. Call them, I whispered to the empty room. Please, call them. I didn't sleep well, but not because I was worried. I was wired. It was the adrenaline of the fight. I woke up at 600 a.m., made a pot of coffee and sat on my back porch. The sun was rising, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, a stark contrast to the digital apocalypse I knew was raging inside the glass tower downtown. At 700 a.m. sharp, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. A DC area code, probably the corporate lawyers. I let it ring. At 7:15 a.m. it rang again, same number. At 7:30 a.m. Bryce called. I took a sip of coffee black and swiped to answer. Hello, Victor? Bryce's voice was high, pitched up an octave, stripped of all its cool guy veneer. I could hear shouting in the background. I could hear phones ringing. Where the hell have you been? I've been calling you all night. I'm unemployed, Bryce, I said, leaning back in my patio chair. I was sleeping in. That's what we legacy people do when we're put out to pasture. Cut the crap. Bryce snapped. What did you do? The entire vendor API is down. The warehouse can't scan barcodes. Logistics is at a standstill. We're bleeding $50,000 an hour. I didn't do anything, Bryce. Don't lie to me. It worked fine yesterday morning. You left, and 3 hours later, everything crashed. You planted a logic bomb. I know you did. I've got security pulling the logs right now. Pull them, I said. Check them. You won't find a logic bomb. You won't find a virus. You won't find a single line of malicious code. Then why isn't it working? He screamed. Because the watchdog auth. PyScript failed to authenticate. There was a pause. The what? The script, Bryce? The automation script that handles the token exchange between your ancient mainframe and that shiny new cloud ERP you love so much. It runs every afternoon at 4:05 p.m. It requires a valid user certificate to execute. So, fix it. I can't. The certificate is tied to my user account. So share the password. Give me the admin keys. I can't do that either, Bryce. My account was disabled. By you. Remember? Immediate effect. When you deleted my user profile, you deleted the certificate. Then turn it back on. I don't work there anymore, I reminded him gently. I don't have access. I'll reinstate you, he said, the desperation leaking through. Temporary contractor status. Just come in and fix it. We'll pay you your daily rate. No. Excuse me. I said no. I'm not coming in. Victor, listen to me. Bryce's voice dropped, trying to sound menacing but landing somewhere near petulant. If you don't fix this, I'm going to sue you for sabotage. I'm going to sue you for destruction of company property. I will bury you. You want to talk about property? I stood up, walking into the kitchen to pour more coffee. Let's talk about property. Those scripts, the ones keeping your company alive. They aren't company property, Bryce. They're mine. What are you talking about? You wrote them while you worked here. Check my contract. 2011. Intellectual property rider B. Personal workflow optimization tools created without proprietary code remain the property of the employee. I wrote those scripts on my own time on my own hardware. To fix the mess your predecessors made, I licensed them to Eldridge while I was employed. You fired me. The license expired. The software didn't break, Bryce. It was repossessed. Silence. Long, heavy silence. You're bluffing, he whispered. Ask legal, I said. And Bryce, you mentioned legacy bloat in the meeting. Those scripts were the bloat. You got exactly what you wanted. You're fully streamlined now. Victor, please. You have about 2 hours before the backup integrity checks fail. I said, checking my watch. If those fail, the database locks into read-only mode to protect itself. You won't be able to process a single payment. How do I stop it? You don't, I said. You're the chief innovation officer. Innovate. I hung up. My hand was shaking slightly, not from fear but from the sheer intensity of the moment. I had just declared war on a billion-dollar corporation. I needed a lawyer. By noon, it was on the news. I sat in my living room watching CNBC. The ticker at the bottom of the screen scrolled the headline ELD Carpi Sarsti MB 12% Amendrukov Majosd Imagi. The anchor, a woman with sharp features and a sharper tone, was interviewing an industry analyst. It appears to be a total back-end collapse. The analyst was saying, trucks are sitting at docks unable to unload. Orders are being canceled. Eldridge is claiming a cyber incident, but sources inside say it looks like a catastrophic failure of internal processes. My phone rang again. This time I answered. It wasn't Bryce, it was a lawyer I had retained an hour ago, an old friend from college named David Chen who specialized in labor law and IP disputes. Victor, David said, his voice crisp. I just got a cease and desist letter from Eldridge's legal team. They're accusing you of holding critical infrastructure hostage. I sent you the contract, David. Did you read it? I did. It's ironclad. You're in the clear on ownership. But they're going to try to argue that your silence constitutes negligence. They're going to try to paint you as a disgruntled employee who pulled the plug. I didn't pull the plug, I said. They cut the cord. I know that. You know that? But we need to prove that they were negligent. Did you leave them documentation, manuals, instructions on how to run the systems without your scripts? I closed my eyes, remembering the storage optimization audit from 2 months ago. I did, I said. I wrote a 200-page operations manual. Detailed everything. The scripts, the failovers, the manual bypass procedures. Great. Where is it? It was on the shared drive, I said, under critical infrastructure. But Bryce had it deleted 6 weeks ago. Said we didn't need static documentation in an agile environment. He replaced it with a wiki that nobody ever updated. Deleted the manual. David's voice brightened. Victor, that's beautiful. Can you prove it? I have the email where he ordered the deletion, and his reply when I objected. I archived my entire inbox to a local drive the night before the layoff. I had a feeling. Send it to me. Now. While I was forwarding the emails, a new notification popped up on my LinkedIn. It was a post from Bryce. He had tagged me. Leadership is about making tough calls. Unfortunately, sometimes former employees choose to sabotage progress rather than embrace change. At Eldridge, we are dealing with a malicious attack on our infrastructure by a disgruntled former team member. We will not be held hostage by legacy thinking or criminal behavior. To innovation, resilience, face cybersecurity. I stared at the screen. He was doubling down. He was publicly accusing me of a crime. The comments were already flooding in. Most were supportive of him, bots and sycophants. But then I saw a comment from someone I didn't expect. Mike from Logistics. Mike Sabotage. The only thing Victor sabotaged was his own sleep schedule, fixing your mistakes for 14 years. Maybe check the error logs before you slander the best engineer we ever had. It was deleted 30 seconds later. David called back. I got the emails. Victor, this is gold. Static documents are a crutch. He actually wrote that. He did. Okay, here's the play. They're going to file an emergency injunction to force you to turn over the passwords and the code. We're going to fight it. But the stock is tanking. The board is going to get involved soon. They're bleeding money. They're going to try to settle. I don't want a settlement, I said, watching the stock ticker drop another 2 points. I want an apology, and I want my severance to reflect the actual value I provided. We can get that, David said. But Victor, brace yourself. They're going to come at you hard before they fold. They're going to try to destroy your reputation. They can try, I said. But they're fighting with broken weapons. That evening, the stakes got personal. I was heating up leftover lasagna when a black sedan pulled into my driveway. A man in a cheap suit got out and walked up to my porch. I opened the door before he could knock. Victor Reynolds. Wes, you've been served. He handed me a thick envelope and walked away without another word. I opened it. It wasn't just a lawsuit from Eldridge. It was a personal lawsuit from Bryce Caldwell, suing me for defamation and emotional distress, claiming I had conspired to humiliate him. I looked at the papers, then at the empty driveway where the sedan had been. Bryce wasn't just incompetent. He was delusional. He actually believed his own spin. He thought he could sue reality into submission. I walked back into my study and sat at the computer. I pulled up the system logs I had saved, the ones showing years of prevented disasters, the ones showing the stability I had maintained. Then I opened a new folder, Exhibit A, the deletion of safety protocols. I wasn't just building a defense. I was building a case for gross negligence. My phone rang again. It was Angela from HR. Her voice was trembling. Victor, please don't hang up. I'm here, Angela. The board of directors is meeting in an hour. They want to know if you'd be willing to join the call. Join the call? I asked. A's what? A's a consultant. Bryce isn't dumb. Bryce is struggling to explain the technical details. The chairman asked for you specifically. I looked at the lawsuit on my desk. I looked at the text from Katie saying she was eating ramen because she didn't want to ask me for grocery money. Tell the chairman, I said, my voice ice cold, that my consulting fee is $5,000 an hour. Minimum 4-hour block. Paid in advance. And I want Bryce on the line silent, listening to every word. Angela gasped. Victor, I can't authorize that. Then don't, I said. But tell the board that the database locks into read-only mode in 45 minutes. And once it does, unlocking it requires a full system wipe and restore from tape backups. That takes 3 days. I'll tell them. I hung up and waited. The notification from my bank app pinned at exactly 40:52 p.m. Incoming wire transfer $20,000. Source Eldridge Corporation Emergency Fund. I stared at the screen. They had actually done it. They had paid $20,000 for 4 hours of my time, with 8 minutes to spare before the database locked itself into a digital coma. My phone rang. It was Angela again. The chairman is on the line, she said, her voice sounding breathless, and the entire executive board. Connecting you now. There was a click, a burst of static, and then the hollow, echoing silence of a conference line populated by very expensive people. Mr. Reynolds, it was a deep, gravelly voice. Harlan Sterling, the chairman of the board, a man who had built his fortune in steel before moving into logistics. He didn't have patience for tech jargon, and he certainly didn't have patience for failure. I'm here, Mr. Sterling, I said, putting the call on speaker and settling into my chair in front of my home workstation. We have received your terms, Sterling said. The funds have been transferred. We are currently losing approximately $100,000 every 15 minutes. Fix it. One moment, I said calmly. I'm logging into the remote admin portal now. Or I would be if my credentials hadn't been revoked. I reactivated them 5 minutes ago. Bryce's voice cut in, shrill and defensive. He has access. He's just stalling to make us look bad. Thank you, Bryce, I said, typing my old username and password. The system accepted them. I saw the familiar command line interface blink green. It was like greeting an old friend. I'm in. Then fix it, Bryce shouted. Input the whatever code you hid from us. I didn't hide anything, Bryce, I said, my voice steady enough to carry the weight of the truth. I'm looking at the system logs now. It seems you attempted to force a manual override of the vendor API about 2 hours ago. Is that correct? Silence. Sterling asked. Did you attempt an override? We were trying to restore service, Bryce stammered. Victor's legacy code was blocking the new architecture. We tried to bypass it. I continued, typing a query into the terminal. You corrupted the index table. If the system had locked down at 500 p.m. as scheduled, that corruption would have become permanent. You would have lost 14 years of transaction history. That's not a software bug, Mr. Sterling. That is gross negligence. That's a lie, Bryce yelled. He's spinning this! He's the one who planted the dependency! He's holding the company hostage! Mr. Reynolds, Sterling's voice was dangerously low. Can you restore operations? Yes, I said. I'm executing the watchdog auth. PyScript manually now. I'm also running a repair on the index table to fix the damage Bryce caused this afternoon. I hit enter. On my screen, lines of code cascaded like a waterfall. Authenticating success token refreshed, index repair initiated 10%, 40%, 100% system green. It's done, I said. We're seeing it. A new voice chimed in, probably the VP of operations. The warehouse boards just lit up. Orders are printing. The queue is clearing. My God, it's fast. It's fast because I optimized it for 10 years, I said. Bryce said, his tone shifting instantly to relief. I told you it was a simple fix! He could have done this yesterday. He let us suffer on purpose. Chairman, I move that we immediately revoke his access again and file criminal charges for. Shut up, Bryce, Sterling said. The two words were spoken with the finality of a gavel strike. Excuse me, Bryce squeaked. Mr. Reynolds, Sterling said, ignoring his chief innovation officer. You mentioned earlier that the documentation for these systems was available. Bryce claims it never existed. It existed, I said. I just emailed a zip file to the board secretary. It contains a copy of the 200-page operations manual I wrote. It also contains an email dated 2 months ago from Bryce Caldwell to myself, ordering the deletion of said manual because, and I quote, static documentation is a crutch for people who can't think on their feet. I could hear the collective gasp in the conference room. He ordered you to delete the manual? Sterling asked. Yes, sir. And when I objected, he threatened me with a performance improvement plan for resisting cultural transformation. Bright is taken out of context? Bryce sounded desperate now. We were moving to a wiki! A collaborative knowledge base. And did you populate this wiki, Bryce? Sterling asked. Did you transfer the critical recovery procedures to this new system before ordering the deletion of the old one? Silence. The kind of silence that ends careers. Mr. Reynolds, Sterling said, his voice heavy with suppressed rage. Thank you for your assistance. The board will be reviewing the materials you sent. You may disconnect. One last thing, Mr. Sterling, I said. My consulting contract for today includes a clause. I retain ownership of my personal tools. The script I just ran to save your company. It belongs to me. If you want to keep using it, we need to discuss a licensing agreement. Otherwise, I'll be taking it with me when I log off. You can't do that? Bryce screamed. That's extortion. That's capitalism, Bryce. I corrected. Mr. Sterling, draft the agreement, Sterling said instantly. Whatever the standard industry rate is, double it, and send it to my personal office. We are done with innovation for the time being. Understood? I said. And Bryce, you might want to update your LinkedIn. Former Chief Innovation Officer has a nice ring to it. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment in the silence of my home office. The fan on my server rack hummed a steady, rhythmic tune. I looked at the terminal window, the green text simply saying process complete. I didn't cheer. I didn't pump my fist. I just leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 3 months. I picked up my phone and texted Katie. Crisis handled. Tuition is safe. How about we get steaks tonight instead of pasta? The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely public. The next morning, the headlines had shifted. El Dredigi Kafir Ciodi Executive AMMDIT Skadel. The article detailed how Bryce Caldwell had been escorted from the building by security less than 10 minutes after the board call ended. Apparently, they didn't even let him go back to his office to get his standing desk. But the real victory wasn't Bryce's firing. It was the phone call I got 3 days later. It was Patricia Keene from Stratum Systems. Victor, she said. I heard about what happened. The whole industry is talking about it. The 5-minute fix, news travels fast, I said. We want you, Victor. And we're done playing games. I'm emailing you an offer letter right now. Senior Vice President of Infrastructure Stability. You'd report directly to the CTO. No innovation, gurus looking over your shoulder. You run the show. I opened the email. The salary was double what I had made at Eldridge. The equity package was substantial. But the most important part was the job description. Responsible for the resilience, security, and long-term stability of core systems. They weren't hiring me to write code. They were hiring me to be the adult in the room. When do I start? I asked. Monday, she said. We have a mess of a backup system that needs your eyes. 6 months later, I found myself sitting in a deposition room again, but this time the atmosphere was very different. Eldridge Corporation was being sued by a consortium of angry shareholders, and I was their star witness. Sarah Mitchell, the plaintiff's attorney, sat across from me. Mr. Reynolds, she said, sliding a document across the table. Can you explain to the record why the Eldridge systems failed so catastrophically? Because they removed the load-bearing walls to make the house look open concept, I said. They fired the people who knew where the pipes were buried because they thought plumbing was legacy technology. The lawyers for Eldridge, a new team, looking exhausted, didn't even object. They knew it was true. Bryce was there, sitting in the back corner. He looked smaller. The Patagonia vest was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting suit. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I heard later that he was facing personal liability lawsuits for negligence and was currently working as a freelance consultant with 0 clients. After the deposition, I walked out into the bright afternoon sun. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the Eldridge Legal Department. License renewal for Watchdog Auth. PI approved. Payment of $15,000 for Q3 processed. I smiled. They were paying me more now to rent my code than they used to pay me to write it. I drove home, the windows down, the air smelling of spring. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw my neighbor, Bill, working on his lawnmower in the garage. I parked the truck, a new model I'd bought last month, and walked over. "Hey Victor," Bill said, wiping grease from his hands. "How's the new gig?" "It's good, really good. They listen. That's all a man can ask for," he nodded. "You hear about your old place? Stock's still down 40%. I heard. You miss it." I looked back at my house. Through the kitchen window I could see Katie. She was home for the weekend, laughing on the phone, healthy and happy. The insulin in the fridge was fully stocked, paid for by Stratum's Platinum insurance plan. The retirement account was replenished. The anxiety that had knotted my stomach for years was gone. "No," I said. "I don't miss it." I realized something. "Bill, what's that?" I spent 14 years trying to keep a sinking ship afloat because I thought I was the captain. But I wasn't the captain. I was just the guy bailing water. And sometimes, the only way to prove you were the one keeping it dry is to put down the bucket and step off the boat. Bill chuckled, cracking open 2 cold beers and handing me one. "To dry land," he said. I clinked my bottle against his. To dry land. We stood there watching the sun go down, the golden light hitting the trees. I thought about Bryce, scrambling for relevance in a world that had seen through his act. I thought about the Eldridge board, finally paying the price for their arrogance. And then I stopped thinking about them entirely. I took a sip of beer, felt the cool breeze on my face, and thought about tomorrow. I had a backup system to redesign at Stratum. It was going to be complex, it was going to be difficult, and it was going to be absolutely bulletproof. Because that's what I do. I build things that last. And now, finally, I was building a life that would last too.